Why did the entire square fall silent when the guard took just one step closer? No one moved. No one spoke. The sound of boots on stone seemed louder than it should have, echoing against the tall facades of the buildings surrounding them. The square was alive a moment ago, whispers, rustling uniforms, even the creak of old rifles against leather straps. But now, silence clung to the air like fog. At the center of that silence stood her. She wasn't taller than the others. She wasn't decorated in a way that screamed rank or power, yet every eye seemed to turn toward her. A woman in fatigues, sleeves rolled, jaw tight. Her hair, tied back without care for neatness, revealed a scar above her temple, faint but noticeable if you looked long enough. The kind of scar that spoke of something survived, not something displayed. She shifted her weight slightly. Her hand brushed against the strap of the rifle slung over her shoulder. And though the square was filled with soldiers, most of them men who had seen battles of their own, the moment the guard stepped closer, they fell quiet, waiting, almost holding their breath. But why? That answer didn't belong to this square. It belonged to years before, to deserts and mountains, to nights where the only sound was her own heartbeat in her ears. And even now, standing still in the open, she wasn't sure if she wanted them to know. Her name was kept simple in records, Elena. No titles, no embellishments, just a name. The silence broke not with words but with the wind. It curled through the square, carrying dust, rattling a loose flag against its pole. She blinked against it, and in that brief flicker, her mind wandered back to a different sound, a sound that never left her. The metallic snap of a rifle bolt sliding into place. The cold click before the silence of a shot. She swallowed hard. No one noticed. They were too busy staring at the guard who had taken that single step forward, as if it meant something they couldn't articulate. He didn't mean to create a scene. His boots simply shifted closer to her. Maybe curiosity, maybe doubt, but what it stirred in the others was unmistakable. Respect, fear. No, something quieter, something heavier. Recognition. Because word had traveled long before she did. About the mission no one fully understood. About the choices she made when the radio went dead and she was left with nothing but instinct. About the 3 lives saved because she didn't wait for orders, and the 1 life lost because of it. But none of them knew the part that mattered most. The 1 life lost was her brother's. Her eyes traced the guard's face. Young, sharp jaw, not unlike her brother the last time she saw him. For a second the square blurred, uniforms faded, voices distant. She could almost hear laughter, rough and unpolished, from a night long ago when he teased her about holding a rifle wrong. He was the one who told her she didn't belong in the shadows, that she had something others didn't, the ability to breathe steady when everything else was falling apart. And then he was gone. That silence in the square felt familiar, the silence she carried inside every time she thought of him. The commander's voice cracked the air finally, at ease. The soldiers shifted, boots scraping stone, but the heaviness lingered. They didn't speak to her. They didn't need to. Their silence carried something words would never hold, the unspoken weight of a story they'd only heard in fragments. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. The mission ahead was simple on paper: escort, observe, protect. But in reality, nothing about it was simple. Not the terrain, not the politics, not the quiet enemy no one could name out loud, and certainly not the memories she carried into it. She adjusted her rifle strap, fingers brushing metal, a gesture so small, yet it grounded her, reminded her that for all the whispers, for all the silence that seemed to follow her, she wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. She was here because she promised him. The thought pressed heavy on her chest. Promises made in whispers at night, promises that no one else heard, were sometimes louder than commands shouted across radios. The guard who stepped closer finally spoke, quietly, almost to himself. "Is it true?" Her eyes lifted to his, calm, steady. She didn't answer. Some truths weren't meant for squares filled with ears. Some truths lived only in the silence between two people who understood what it meant to carry loss like a shadow. He lowered his eyes, as if he already knew. And still the question lingered in the air, unanswered, but alive. Why did the square fall silent? Because silence sometimes says more than words. She turned away first, boots striking stone. One step, then another. Her shadow stretched across the ground, long against the setting sun. With each step she felt the weight of eyes on her back, but also something else, the faint echo of his voice, telling her to keep moving. The mission hadn't even begun, but already it was clear this wasn't about them. It wasn't about the guard, the square, the silence. It was about her, and the promises she couldn't let die. Still in that silence, doubt gnawed at her. Would she recognize the moment when it came? The moment where instinct and sacrifice collided, where choice meant everything? Or would she hesitate just long enough to lose more than she already had? The thought stayed with her as she left the square. The silence trailed her like a shadow, and somewhere deep down she wondered, what will I have to give up this time? Why did the commander look at her that way, as if he knew something he could never say out loud? The briefing room was dim, lit by a single bulb that flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive or not. Maps spread across the wooden table, lines drawn in red, circles sketched hastily. A city fractured, a road dangerous, a square volatile, and beyond it the mission that everyone kept describing as straightforward. Elena sat still, her back rigid, hands folded over her knee. She let the voices swirl around her, men exchanging orders, debating routes, adjusting timetables. No one asked her what she thought. They didn't need to. They just wanted her eyes, her steadiness, her silence. Silence, it had become her weapon. The commander's gaze lingered. A man with deep lines carved into his forehead, hair grayed at the edges, shoulders that slumped only when he thought no one noticed. He cleared his throat, voice carrying a weight sharpened by too many years of saying the same things in different wars. "You all know your roles," he said. "Escort the convoy to the compound. Maintain distance. No unnecessary risks. If contact occurs," he paused, his eyes moving to Elena. "We rely on instinct. We trust the one watching." A silence, not the heavy kind from the square. A different silence. A silence that pressed her into the role they had already written for her. She wasn't one of them. She was a part. She was the eye above the storm, the shot in the distance, the shadow they trusted without ever touching. Her fingers curled against her knee. She wanted to ask, and what if instinct isn't enough? But the words stayed behind her teeth. Because she remembered the last time she questioned an order. The night her brother bled out under the pale light of the moon, and she was told later that she'd done everything right. Everything except the thing that mattered. The convoy moved out at dawn. Engines hummed low, tires crunched gravel. The horizon bled orange as the sun pulled itself over jagged rooftops. Elena sat in the last vehicle, pressed against the window, rifle across her lap. She watched the shadows shift as they rolled out of the compound, watched people on the edges of the streets pause in their routines. Women carrying baskets, children darting between doorways, men who stood too still, too quiet. Her instincts sharpened the way they always did. Every silence became suspect. Every sudden movement a threat. Yet she also noticed smaller things, a woman's hand brushing her daughter's hair aside, a boy clutching a broken toy car, his eyes following the convoy with something that wasn't fear but curiosity. The convoy commander, a man named Harlan, broke the silence inside the vehicle. His voice was rough, threaded with humor that didn't always land. "You don't talk much, do you?" he said, glancing at Elena. She shifted her gaze from the window. "Not much to say." "That's what worries me," Harlan said with a half-smile. "The quiet ones always know more than the rest of us." Another soldier chuckled. "She probably knows how each of us will die before we do." Elena's jaw tightened, but she let the comment slide. Not because it wasn't true in some way, she had seen enough patrols end in ways no one expected, but because she knew silence kept her alive. Silence let her breathe steady. Silence was the difference between a heartbeat and a trigger squeeze. Harlan's smile faded. Don't mind him. Some of these guys don't know what it's like to be left in the quiet. The words hit harder than he intended. Left in the quiet. That was exactly what happened to her when her brother was taken by a single bullet she didn't see coming. Everyone else shouted. Everyone else panicked. And she was just left in the quiet. Her hand brushed the scar on her temple unconsciously. The convoy slowed as they reached a narrow road. Buildings pressed close, windows dark. Elena's body tensed, her breath shallowed. The silence outside the vehicle was too heavy, too deliberate. "Windows," she whispered. Harlan glanced at her. "What?" "Top floor, second from the left." He followed her line of sight. Nothing moved, just curtains hanging limp, shadows still. But he didn't argue. He raised his hand, signaling to the lead vehicle. They slowed further, weapons raised. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then nothing. No shot, no flash, no sudden explosion, just silence stretching. The convoy rolled on, but not without cost. Every soldier in the vehicle now looked at her differently, some with relief, some with unease, some with suspicion. She didn't explain herself. She couldn't. Sometimes instinct wasn't about being right. Sometimes it was about being ready to be wrong. As the road opened into the edge of the city, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt lighter, as though the buildings themselves no longer pressed down. Soldiers loosened shoulders, laughed too quickly, exhaled breaths they didn't realize they were holding. But Elena stayed tight. Her brother's voice still echoed in her memory. "Never relax until it's over. That's when it happens. That's when they find you." Hours passed. Heat pressed heavy. Dust clung to her throat. Sweat gathered at the base of her neck. The convoy reached the compound before noon, a place half ruined, walls patched, gates rusted. It wasn't home, not to anyone, but for now it was safe enough. Inside, soldiers unloaded gear, set up positions, shared quick meals. Normalcy returned in fragments. One lit a cigarette, another wrote in a worn notebook, another laughed at a joke about rations. Elena found herself on the roof, rifle balanced, scanning the horizon. The city stretched far, dotted with satellite dishes, broken concrete, laundry lines that waved like fragile flags. The sun bore down, relentless. And yet beneath it life moved. A woman filled buckets at a well. A boy chased a stray dog. A man hammered nails into a crooked frame. From up here the city didn't look like an enemy. It looked like survival. "Do you ever get tired of it?" a voice asked behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She kept her eyes on the scope, scanning. Of what? Watching, waiting, being the one who sees. It was Harlan. His footsteps were soft, his tone not unkind. Elena lowered the rifle slightly, resting her chin against the stock. "You don't get tired of breathing." He studied her for a moment, leaning against the low wall of the rooftop. "You ever wonder if we're the ones being watched? If some kid out there is looking at us the same way?" She did. She thought about it often. The thought unsettled her that somewhere someone else held the silence, the trigger, the choice. She didn't say it aloud. Harlan sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I had a brother, too, didn't make it back from his last deployment. Some days I tell myself he knew what he was doing. Other days," his voice cracked slightly, "other days I think it was all just a coin toss." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him she understood, that her brother's death didn't feel like fate or sacrifice, but like punishment for something she couldn't name. Instead, she just said, "I'm sorry." He nodded. That was enough. Sometimes sorrow needed no more than recognition. A sound split the air suddenly, distant, sharp. Not thunder, not a car, a shot. Both of them froze. Elena lifted the rifle, scope snapping into focus. Her breath steadied, her finger hovering. Her eyes searched rooftops, alleys, broken windows. Nothing. Her heartbeat thundered, but her hands were steady. The compound below erupted in shouts. Soldiers scrambled, rifles raised, orders shouted. The silence from earlier had been replaced with chaos, but inside Elena it was the opposite. The louder the world became, the quieter she grew. She whispered to herself the same words her brother once told her. Breathe steady, wait, don't rush the silence. And then through the scope she saw it. A glint, a shape, a shadow moving where no one should be. She drew in a slow breath, held it. And the square, the convoy, the compound, all of it faded. There was only silence. And a choice. Why did she hesitate, when hesitation was the one thing she swore she'd never allow again? Through the scope she had him, a shadow at the edge of a rooftop, rifle angled, movements too sharp to be anything but deliberate. The sun caught the glass of his scope, just for an instant, and that was all it took to confirm what instinct already screamed. He was watching them. Her finger rested against the trigger, steady, familiar. She could feel the pulse in her fingertips, the heat in the metal, and yet she didn't squeeze. Why not? The shot should have come easy. It always did once. Her breath would slow, her heartbeat would fade, the world would narrow to a single point. But this time, something different held her still. The figure wasn't aiming at her, not even at Harlan, who crouched nearby. He was aiming at the courtyard below, where soldiers moved in confusion, and where a boy with the broken toy car now stood, frozen in the middle of the compound gate. Elena's chest tightened. She saw her brother in that boy's face, wide-eyed, unaware of what the world was capable of. If I fire now, if I miss, he dies. The thought clawed through her. Missing wasn't common for her, but the memory of the one shot she didn't take, the one that left her brother exposed, haunted every trigger she ever touched. Harlan's voice cut into the silence. Do you see him? She didn't answer. Elena, his tone sharpened. Now would be a good time. Her scope locked on the shadow. Her finger brushed the trigger. The boy below stood frozen, clutching that toy car, eyes darting but legs refusing to move. She exhaled, long, slow, and fired. The crack tore through the rooftop, echoed across the compound, bounced off broken walls and empty windows. Soldiers ducked instinctively. The boy flinched, dropping the toy. Elena's eyes stayed glued to the scope. The rooftop was empty, the shadow was gone. Her heart sank. Did she miss? No, the silence answered before the doubt could consume her. A rifle clattered against concrete. A body slumped, half hidden by the low wall of the roof. She had hit. Clean. But the boy's scream pierced through the victory. Elena's head snapped down. He wasn't bleeding. He wasn't hurt. But he was on his knees, clutching his ears, face twisted with terror. Soldiers rushed to drag him to cover, shouting in languages that blurred together. The boy's scream stayed with her, louder than the gunshot, louder than Harlan's relieved sigh beside her. You saved him, Harlan said, voice low, steady. Good shot. She lowered the rifle slowly, hands trembling only now after the fact. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words carry weight, but her chest felt hollow. Saved him, maybe, but at what cost? She thought of her brother again, the last words he ever spoke to her. Don't let them see you doubt, Elena. Don't let them see you pause. She had paused, and though the target was down, doubt still burned inside her. The compound calmed in fragments. Orders were shouted, perimeters reinforced, soldiers checked ammo counts and scanned rooftops. The threat seemed isolated, one shooter, not a coordinated assault, but in war one was often enough. Elena stayed on the rooftop, scope sweeping, refusing to relax. The boy's scream still echoed. The broken toy still lay near the gate, forgotten in the dirt. Harlan crouched beside her. His hand brushed against the wall as if grounding himself in stone. You hesitated. Her jaw clenched. She didn't look at him. It's not a criticism, he added quietly. Just an observation. You hesitated and then you fired. She finally spoke, and if I hadn't. He shrugged. Then someone else would be dead, maybe me, maybe that boy, maybe all of us if he got lucky with that shot. His words were meant as reassurance, but they fell heavy, because Elena knew hesitation wasn't supposed to exist for her, not in her role, not as the one who carried silence like a weapon. She leaned back against the wall, eyes closing briefly. Her brother's face flashed in memory again. The night he teased her for breathing too fast while she steadied her rifle. The morning he pressed his hand to her shoulder, telling her she had the kind of stillness he envied. She had believed him once. But now she wondered if that stillness had cracked the moment he was gone. Hours stretched. The heat settled like a weight over the compound. The boy had been taken inside, given water, reassured. He clung to a soldier's sleeve as if it were a lifeline. Elena couldn't bring herself to go down there. She didn't want him to see her face. When evening came, the horizon painted itself in orange and red, the city glowing briefly before night swallowed it whole. Elena stayed on the roof. She always stayed on the roof. The others rotated watch. She didn't. Silence was safer. Silence didn't betray you. But even in silence, voices found her. Harlan returned with 2 tin cups. He set one beside her, the smell of bitter coffee cutting through the dust. You're not leaving this roof, are you? Not yet. He leaned against the wall, sipping his coffee, grimacing at the taste. You know, I used to think coffee was the only thing that kept me sane out here. Now I'm not so sure. Sometimes I think it's the silence between patrols. Elena glanced at him. His eyes were tired, rimmed red, but his expression held something softer than most of the men carried. Silence isn't peace, she said quietly. It's just the space before something breaks. He let the words sit. Then softer, your brother, you've never said his name. Her chest tightened. Why would I? Because sometimes saying it is the only way to make sure you haven't forgotten. She stared into the darkness beyond the walls. For a long time she didn't speak. Then, barely audible, Daniel. The name cracked something inside her. It felt strange, foreign, as if speaking it aloud might summon him. Harlan nodded. Mine was Matthew. Silence settled again, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was shared, a silence that carried weight without breaking either of them. Down below, laughter echoed faintly. Soldiers telling stories, exaggerating details, clinging to normalcy. For a moment, Elena envied them. For a moment, she wished she could laugh too. But her eyes kept scanning the dark horizon. Because she knew the shooter wasn't alone. And though no one else felt it yet, the silence of the city pressed back against her, like eyes she couldn't see, waiting for the next mistake. She whispered to herself again, not for Harlan, not for anyone else. For you, Daniel, always for you. And in the darkness, the echo of her brother's voice returned, steady, calm, reminding her what silence was meant to do. Protect. Why did the laughter stop so suddenly, as if the night itself had leaned in and stolen the sound away? It was past midnight. The compound was quiet except for the occasional shuffle of boots, the hum of a distant generator, the faint murmur of soldiers talking low to keep themselves awake. Elena sat on the rooftop still, rifle across her lap, her eyes tracing the horizon that seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. The city slept, or at least pretended to. Windows were black, alleys empty, rooftops still. But Elena had learned long ago that stillness was never just stillness. It was preparation. She tilted her head, listening. Not for voices, not for gunfire, for something else. The absence. A dog barked once in the distance. Then silence. No echo, no follow-up. The hair on the back of her neck lifted. She whispered to herself, barely audible, too quiet. Harlan was making his rounds. He climbed the narrow ladder to the rooftop, his boots careful on each rung, as though he didn't want to disturb her watch. He carried the same tin cup as before, half full with something that smelled stronger than coffee this time. "You don't sleep, do you?" he said softly. Elena's eye stayed pressed to the scope. "Sleep slows you down." "Or it keeps you human," he countered, sipping from the cup. He grimaced at the burn but said nothing more about it. Her finger tapped the stock of the rifle's steady rhythm, like a clock ticking away seconds. "They're out there." Harlan leaned against the low wall beside her, following her gaze. "Who?" She didn't answer. She couldn't explain it, not without sounding like a woman haunted by ghosts instead of instincts. But she knew, just as she knew the difference between silence that meant peace and silence that meant danger. "They're watching," she said finally. Harlan didn't argue, maybe because he trusted her, maybe because he'd lost enough to know not to dismiss a soldier's gut. He sipped again, then offered the cup to her. She shook her head. "You ever think," he murmured, "that maybe we're the ghosts, that maybe they look at us the way we look at shadows on rooftops?" The question lingered. She didn't answer. Instead, she swept the scope again, slow, deliberate. A flicker, a curtain moving when there was no wind. Her body went rigid. "Second floor," she whispered. "Building north side, left window." Harlan squinted, following her line of sight. He saw nothing, but his hand tightened on his rifle anyway. Could be nothing. "It's never nothing," she said flatly. They watched the window for what felt like hours. It never moved again. The curtain hung still, lifeless. But Elena's chest wouldn't loosen. At dawn, the compound came alive with the sound of engines. Another convoy arrived, supplies, reinforcements, new faces wearing the same exhaustion. Among them was a medic, a woman named Rivera who carried herself with the kind of calm only people who have seen too much suffering can muster. She set up quickly, checked the boy who had been rescued, handed out bandages, water, simple words of reassurance. Elena watched her from the rooftop, curious. Rivera didn't flinch when soldiers joked too loudly. She didn't scowl when one complained about rations. She just moved quietly, efficiently, with a steadiness that reminded Elena of her own before Daniel's death. When Rivera finally climbed the roof to introduce herself, Elena stiffened. She wasn't used to company up here, other than Harlan. "You're the shooter," Rivera said simply, adjusting the strap of her bag. Elena's eyes flicked to her. "I'm a soldier." "Same thing out here," Rivera replied. "But I mean it as a compliment. You saved that boy." Elena's jaw tightened. "I almost didn't." Rivera tilted her head, studying her face with eyes that seemed to see past the walls Elena had built. "Almost doesn't matter. He's alive. That's what counts." Elena wanted to believe her, wanted to let the words ease the weight pressing against her chest. But the image of the boy screaming, clutching his ears, wouldn't fade. "Do you have kids?" Rivera asked softly. The question caught her off guard. "No." "I do," Rivera said. "Two girls. I see them in every child here. Every time I patch one up, I think about mine. Every time I lose one," she trailed off, eyes hardening, "I think about mine too." The silence between them was heavy but human, shared, like the one she'd found with Harlan. Rivera adjusted her bag and stood. "Don't carry it alone," she said simply. "It'll break you if you do." Then she left, climbing down the ladder, her presence lingering long after her boots touched the ground. Elena turned back to the horizon. But this time the silence wasn't just pressing from outside, it pressed from within. By afternoon the compound was tense. A patrol hadn't returned. Radios crackled with static but no voices. Soldiers paced, their jokes quieter now, their glances sharper. Harlan came to the rooftop again, his face drawn tight. "They're late." Elena didn't move her eye from the scope. "They're not coming back." He froze, studying her. "How can you?" She cut him off. "Because I've seen this before. Silence doesn't just happen, it's made." The words chilled him. Minutes stretched, an hour, still no patrol. Then the first sound. Not gunfire, not shouting. A thud heavy near the outer wall. Soldiers rushed to the gate, rifles raised. Elena's scope locked on the source. A body thrown, not carried. One of theirs, face pale, eyes open, blood soaking the uniform. The square inside the compound fell silent, just as it had days ago when she first arrived. Soldiers stared, some muttering prayers, some cursing under their breath. Rivera pushed through, kneeling beside the fallen, hands working quickly even though she already knew it was too late. Elena's chest burned. The silence she had felt building was here. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a message. They weren't safe. Not here, not anywhere. Harlan's voice was low, tight. They're testing us. Elena kept her eye on the scope, scanning rooftops, alleys, windows. No, they're warning us. Warning us of what? She didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth pressed too close to her throat. That boy at the gate hadn't been coincidence. That curtain hadn't been a trick of the wind. Every silence, every flicker, every hesitation had been part of something larger. She whispered again, this time not to herself but to the horizon. What are you waiting for? And though no voice answered, she could feel it in her bones. The enemy was out there, patient, watching, waiting for her to hesitate again. Night returned heavy, swollen with unease. The compound's walls seemed smaller, thinner, as though the world outside had grown larger in its hunger. The body at the gate had not been buried yet. It lay wrapped in a tarp near the medic's tent, waiting for dawn, waiting for a moment when Rivera could do something more than press a hand to her chest and whisper words meant for the dead. Soldiers avoided that corner of the compound now as if grief were contagious. They spoke in short, clipped sentences, arguments sparking over nothing. The laughter from days before was gone. Elena stayed on the rooftop. Her rifle lay ready across her lap, but her finger tapped restlessly on the stock, a rhythm of nerves she couldn't silence. Harlan climbed up again. His face was pale, his jaw set. They're pulling men back from the outer patrols, he said. Command does like it, but no one's volunteering to step outside those gates tonight. Elena's eye never left the scope. Good, keep them inside, keep them alive. He stared at her. That's not why they're doing it, they're scared. So am I, she admitted quietly. Fear keeps you sharp. Fear also gets you killed, Harlan muttered, setting his rifle down and rubbing his temples. Morale's cracking, you can feel it. One more hit like today and… The radio on his belt hissed, a burst of static, then a voice faint, broken. Southeast wall movement can't. The transmission cut out. Both froze. Elena snapped to the southeast wall in her scope. At first, nothing. Just shadows stretching long over rubble, the faint glint of wire, a torn banner fluttering. Then there, a figure, then another. Slow, deliberate, crouched low. Contact, she hissed. Harlan grabbed the radio. All units southeast wall, movement spotted, lock positions. The compound shifted instantly. Boots on gravel, rifles cocking, men rushing to cover. Rivera darted out of her tent, dragging the boy inside by his arm, pressing him down behind sandbags. Elena steadied her breathing. The scope narrowed her world to one silhouette crawling along the wall, too far for detail, too close to ignore. She exhaled, finger tightening on the trigger. And then she froze. Because the silhouette wasn't carrying a weapon, it was dragging something. A sack. Her gut twisted. No, she whispered. She fired anyway. The figure dropped, the sack rolled, and as it hit the ground it spilled. Not weapons, not explosives. Food, bread, dried fruit. Harlan swore, God damn it. Another figure broke from the shadows, sprinting toward the body. This one carried a rifle. This one was no civilian. Elena fired again. The man crumpled before he reached the wall. Shouts rose from the compound, some soldiers cheering, others cursing. Confusion spread faster than certainty. Was that, one voice shouted. Civilians, another argued. Shut up and hold your lines, a sergeant bellowed. But the damage was done. The silence outside had turned into whispers inside, whispers that ate at trust, at unity. Elena's hands trembled as she reloaded. Harlan looked at her, eyes burning. You did what you had to. She didn't answer, couldn't, because the truth pressed sharp against her ribs. She had killed a man who carried bread. And now every soldier here knew it. The night dragged on. Sporadic gunfire crackled from the walls. Shadows moved, retreated, moved again. The enemy wasn't attacking, not fully. They were testing, pushing, waiting. By dawn, exhaustion painted every face in the compound. Eyes red, jaws tight, hands twitching near triggers. Rivera approached Elena on the rooftop, her voice low. What happened last night? Elena kept her gaze on the horizon. They sent someone to the wall. I shot. Was he armed? Elena hesitated. That silence was answer enough. Rivera's shoulders sagged. She looked older in the daylight, as though the weight of too many bodies pulled at her skin. You know what that does to morale. They'll start seeing enemies in everyone, even me. Elena turned to her, voice hard. That's what they want. Confusion, doubt. If I hadn't shot, we'd all be dead by now. Rivera studied her for a long moment. You keep saying they. Who are they, Elena? What do they want? The question cut deeper than Elena expected. She wanted to answer, wanted to give the shadows a name, a face, but the truth was harder. They want us to break ourselves, she said finally. The day passed restless. No attacks, no voices, just silence that thickened until it pressed against skin. Soldiers dozed in corners with rifles across their laps, jerking awake at the faintest sound. Harlan paced the yard like a man trapped in a cage. Rivera kept to her tent, her calm presence now weighed down by unspoken fears. And Elena stayed on the roof, watching, always watching. At dusk, the silence shattered. A blast shook the southeast wall, dust and stone flying. Alarms shouted through the compound. Gunfire cracked from every side. There in the alleys, someone screamed. Elena snapped her scope to the breach. Figures poured through smoke, rifles raised, faces masked. This was no test, no warning, this was an assault. She fired. One dropped, then another. She shifted, fired again, the rhythm of recoil steadying her breath even as chaos tore through the compound. Harlan shouted orders, rallying men to the breach. Grenades thudded, smoke thickened. Rivera dragged the boy deeper into cover, shouting at soldiers bleeding in the dust. Elena kept firing, one by one, each shot precise. But for every body that fell, more came. The compound shook with the weight of it, bullets hammering walls, men shouting, silence swallowed whole by violence. And still, deep beneath it all, Elena felt it. The silence hadn't left. It was here, inside her, waiting for the moment she missed. Why hadn't the walls fallen yet? That thought haunted Elena as dawn bled gray across the sky. Smoke still curled above the breach. Spent shells littered the compound like brass confetti from a nightmare. The night's assault had stopped, yes, but not ended. The enemy had pulled back with precision. Not retreat, a pause, like wolves circling, waiting for the right vein to strike. Inside, the compound looked more broken than the walls. Men slumped against sandbags, uniforms stained dark, bandages wrapped loose where there wasn't time for clean work. The boy in Rivera's tent had stopped crying hours ago. He stared now, hollow, as if silence had entered him too. Elena moved among them, her rifle still slung. Every step was watched, every movement measured. Some soldiers nodded to her, grateful. Others looked away, unable or unwilling to forget the bread sack. Harlan met her near the command post, his face lined with exhaustion. He hadn't slept. Neither had she. They'll hit again today, he said flatly. Stronger, she answered. He almost smiled. You sound certain. She didn't respond. Certainty wasn't comfort, it was warning. Rivera appeared then, her hands streaked with dried blood. "We lost 3 more last night," she said. 2 to bullets, 1 bled out waiting. Her voice broke on the last word, but only for a second. She straightened, forcing her calm back into place. "I can't do this again if they come tonight. Not with what little we have left." Elena looked at her. "You'll do it anyway." Rivera blinked. "Why?" "Because there's no one else." Silence settled between them, heavy, unforgiving. Then a shout cut through the compound. A young soldier, barely more than a kid, sprinting toward them. His helmet too big, his hands trembling as he pointed back at the wall. "They're here southeast." The world snapped tight again. Elena didn't run. She walked deliberate, controlled to the rooftop, dropped prone and brought the scope to her eye. The alley beyond the breach swarmed. Not dozens this time. Hundreds, moving with a coordination that wasn't desperate but planned. She swallowed hard. Harlan's voice roared below, rallying men to positions. Rivera dragged the wounded deeper into shadow. The boy clung to her sleeve. Elena exhaled and fired. 1, 2, 3. Each shot landed, bodies falling into the dust, but it didn't matter. More pushed forward, unbroken. The compound erupted in chaos, rifles spitting fire, grenades thudding against the dirt, screams tangled with gunshots. The air turned into iron and smoke. Elena fired until the barrel steamed. She shifted targets, her scope dancing head, chest, shoulder, another head, a rhythm that drowned the sound of her heart. But then a flash. Movement on the rooftops opposite, not an assault rifle, something heavier. Her breath caught. A launcher. "Elena," Harlan's voice below panicked. "They've got." The explosion tore through the wall before he finished. Stone and steel collapsed inward, a section of the compound ripped open like paper. Men screamed, thrown back in showers of debris. Dust blinded the air. For a moment Elena saw nothing, just gray, just silence. She blinked hard, coughing, forcing the scope back to her eye. Figures flooded through the gap, fast, shouting in a language she didn't need to understand to know what it meant. "Fall back," Harlan's voice cracked. "Fall back to the inner yard." Elena didn't move. She fired into the breach, one shot after another, covering the men scrambling behind sandbags. Her arms burned. Her lungs screamed. But she didn't stop. Until the roof shuddered beneath her. She rolled instinctively. A round punched into the spot where her chest had been seconds before. Sniper. Her pulse slammed into her throat. She pressed flat against the rooftop. Scope angled just enough to catch the glint on the opposite building. There. She fired, the glint disappeared. But the silence inside her deepened, because she knew. For every sniper she spotted, there was another she hadn't. She slid down from the roof, boots hitting dirt, her rifle clutched tight. The inner yard was chaos. Rivera bent over a man whose leg was shredded, shouting for someone to bring cloth, anything. The boy held a water canteen with trembling hands. Harlan fired from the corner, shouting orders no one could fully hear. His face was streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes burned. "Elena," he barked, "we can't hold this." She looked at him, the truth was raw in his voice, brutal. But if they abandoned the compound now, if they ran, none of them would make it to open ground. The silence outside the walls wasn't safety. It was a trap. She felt it. She knew it. So she shook her head. "We hold." Harlan stared at her like she was mad. Then something in his jaw shifted. Not agreement, but resolve. He turned back to his men, voice sharp. "You heard her, hold this line." The enemy poured through the breach again. Elena raised her rifle, every muscle trembling, every heartbeat a drum in her ears. She fired again. The silence inside her was gone now, replaced by thunder. But thunder couldn't last forever. By dusk, the compound was barely standing. The southeast wall gone, the courtyard buried in smoke, the wounded lined against sandbags, their groans filling the air like a low hymn of suffering. Elena sat against a wall, rifle across her knees, her body shaking with exhaustion she could no longer hide. Rivera knelt beside her, pressing a rag to her own bleeding arm. How much longer can we last? Elena didn't answer, couldn't, because the truth pressed too heavy on her tongue. Not long. Not long at all. And still, as darkness fell again, the square outside remained silent. The enemy was waiting, watching, letting them bleed themselves dry. Why hadn't the enemy finished them yet? That question pulsed in every soldier's eyes as night fell again. The compound was a ruin. Smoke drifted where walls had been. Blood darkened the dirt in black patches that would never wash away. And yet, no final push. It was worse this way, waiting, listening, knowing they were out there. Elena sat on a splintered crate near what had once been the southeast wall. Her rifle lay across her thighs, her fingers absently tracing the grooves of the stock. Her body screamed for sleep, but every time her eyes shut, she saw the bread sack tumble open. She hadn't told anyone the full truth of that shot. She never would, but she knew the others suspected. Silence wasn't trust anymore. Silence was accusation. Harlan crouched nearby, chain-smoking despite rules against it. His eyes were ringed red, his hands jittering. "They're toying with us," he muttered. Why wait? Just end it already." Elena didn't look at him, because fear does more damage than bullets. He barked a humorless laugh. "You think they're philosophers? No, they're letting us rot." She finally turned, her gaze steady. "Does it matter why? The result's the same." He stared at her, then spat into the dirt. "You sound like you've already given up." "I haven't," she said softly. "That's the problem." He didn't reply, maybe couldn't. A scream broke the night, from the infirmary tent. Both sprang up, rifles in hand, sprinting across the yard. Rivera stood inside, her face pale, her hands pressing down on a soldier's chest, but the blood kept coming, kept spreading. The boy clutched her arm, sobbing. "It's his lung," Rivera gasped. "I can't." Her words cut off as the man's chest stilled. The silence that followed was heavier than the scream. Rivera's hands froze on the body, her eyes unfocused. Then slowly she pulled her hands back, dripping red. The boy whispered, "Why didn't you save him?" Rivera's breath hitched. She turned as if to answer, but no words came. She collapsed to her knees instead, her face crumpling, her shoulders shaking with sobs she could no longer hold back. Elena stood in the doorway, watching. Something twisted deep inside her chest. Because she recognized that collapse, she lived it before. Another life, another war, another loss she could never take back. She stepped forward, knelt, and placed a hand on Rivera's back. Rivera flinched but didn't pull away. "He wasn't yours to save," Elena whispered. Rivera shook her head violently. "They're all mine, every one of them, and they keep dying." Elena's throat tightened. "If you carry all of them, you won't survive yourself." Rivera looked up at her then, tears cutting lines through dirt. "Then what's the point of me being here?" Elena didn't answer, because she didn't know anymore. Later, when the body was carried out and laid beside the others, Harlan approached Elena again. His voice was low, urgent. "We can't hold another night. Supplies are gone, ammo's low, men are breaking." Elena nodded once, "Then we change the fight." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "They want us silent, afraid, pinned down. We give them noise instead." She looked toward the breach, the alleys beyond. "We go out." Harlan's eyes widened. "That's suicide." "It's worse to stay. They'll pick us apart until nothing's left. If we strike, maybe it buys time. Maybe it breaks the circle." He shook his head, almost laughing in disbelief. "And who leads that strike? You." "Yes." The word landed like stone. Silence stretched between them. Then Harlan whispered, "You're insane." "Maybe," she admitted, "but I'm also right." That night, while the wounded slept and the compound held its fragile breath, Elena moved among the men. She spoke to each one quietly. Not orders, not speeches, just words, a hand on a shoulder, a name remembered, a promise even if it couldn't be kept. Some nodded, willing to follow. Others avoided her eyes. She didn't blame them. At dawn, the plan began. A small unit, fewer than 10, gathered near the breach. Elena at the front, Harlan behind her, Rivera refusing to be left behind despite Elena's protest. The boy clung to Rivera's sleeve until she pried his fingers loose, whispering something Elena couldn't hear. The air outside was cold, damp. Mist curled low over the ground, swallowing shapes. Perfect cover, perfect danger. Elena stepped through first. Her boots sank into dust. Her rifle was steady. Every sound was amplified, the creak of gear, the crunch of stone, the faint breath of the men behind her. They moved slowly, alley to alley, empty, abandoned, but not silent. Because the silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was waiting. Elena raised her fist. The unit froze. Ahead, a flicker of movement. She lowered to one knee, scope rising. Through the mist, figures appeared, dozens, then more, surrounding. They had walked into the center of the circle. Her finger tightened on the trigger. But something stopped her. Because one of the figures wasn't carrying a weapon. It was a child. Barefoot, thin, eyes wide. The rifle in Elena's hands felt suddenly heavier. Behind her, Harlan hissed, "Take the shot." She didn't move. The silence pressed closer. She thought of the bread sack, of Rivera's sobs, of every soldier staring at her with doubt. Her chest rose, fell. Then slowly, she lowered her rifle. The men behind her shifted, confused, angry. "Elena," Harlan snapped. She whispered, "Not this one." The mist stirred, figures shifted, weapons raised. The choice had been made. Noise erupted, gunfire tore the air. Elena dropped flat, firing now, not at the child but at the rifles flashing in the mist. The unit scattered, shouting, bullets whining past their ears. Rivera dragged one soldier back from the dirt, blood streaking her arms. Harlan roared orders that no one could hear. And Elena kept firing, each shot a refusal, each shot an answer to the silence. But inside her she knew. This wasn't survival anymore. This was sacrifice. And she had already chosen her place. What sound does a square make when it finally breaks? Elena didn't hear it at first. Only the thunder of rifles, the screams of men falling, the sharp cough of grenades bursting in mist. She fired, shifted, fired again, her body a machine powered by something deeper than strength. Then through the chaos, silence fell again. Not absence, not peace. A silence that spread outward like a shockwave, pulling every sound into itself. The child was gone, vanished into the mist, but the enemy remained. "Elena," Harlan's voice cracked near her ear, "we're surrounded." She turned. His face was bloodied, his helmet dented, but his eyes burned with defiance. "We fight," she said simply. He almost laughed. "You never stop, do you?" "No," she admitted. They pressed back to back, firing into the fog. Rivera dragged another wounded man to cover, screaming for help, her voice breaking raw. The boy from the compound's tent, God, how had he followed? Crouched near her, clutching a rifle far too big for his small frame. "Elena," Rivera shouted, "we can't hold." The mist thickened, shadows pressed closer. And then the silence shifted. A low hum, a vibration in the air, not from rifles, from above. Elena froze, her eyes lifted skyward. At first she thought it was thunder, but then the shape cut through cloud, a helicopter, not enemy, allied. The hum grew louder, sharper, slicing through silence. The enemy faltered, shadows pulled back, Shots scattered, less precise, less certain. Harlan barked a ragged laugh. You called this in. Elena shook her head. No. The helicopter roared closer, then another, then two more. The sky filled with blades. Soldiers cheered through cracked throats. Rivera sagged against sandbags, sobbing with relief. The boy dropped his rifle, his small shoulders shaking. But Elena didn't cheer, because she knew the silence wasn't done with her yet. She rose slowly, rifle in hand, eyes never leaving the mist. The enemy was retreating now, slipping away into alleys, dissolving like ghosts. But ghosts didn't vanish without a cost. Her chest tightened, her breath came ragged. She pressed a hand there, wet, sticky. When had she been hit? Her legs trembled, the rifle slipped. Elena, Rivera's scream tore across the yard. She rushed forward, catching her before she fell. Blood soaked Rivera's hands instantly. No, no, stay with me, Rivera begged. We're safe now, you'll make it, just hold on. Elena tried to smile. The muscles wouldn't obey. Her vision blurred, the mist and the blades above merging into a single pale light. She wanted to speak, to tell Rivera it wasn't her fault, to tell Harlan to stop doubting himself, to tell the boy he would survive. But only one sentence made it past her lips. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Her head grew heavy, her breath shallow. The world tilted. She felt hands on her face, voices shouting her name, but the silence was louder. And then, just as it had begun, the silence answered. It wasn't emptiness. It wasn't fear. It was release. The square fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't because of fear, it was because of respect. Men lowered their weapons. Rivera's sobs softened into whispers. Harlan stood still, his hand on his chest, eyes wet. The boy stared at Elena's still form, then looked toward the sky where the helicopters circled. No one spoke. No one had to. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't the sound of victory. It's the silence left by sacrifice.